when you've finished experimenting with your studies, and do as many as you think you need, really find out what you want to put in the painting, then you need to settle down and do a much more careful drawing, which I've been doing. And having done that, and while I was doing it, I was thinking of the next stage of painting. And what I decided was I was going to start with the shadows first, which is normally the reverse way of painting. It's something we discovered in the first study. And I'll start with that now. I'm trying to keep this fairly loose, but I am looking carefully at my references and glancing at my study to make sure I try and get the architecture and the detail as precise as I can without it slowing me down into some laborious drawing exercise. And drawing fairly crisply and making sure this pre-mix colour, which was Van Dyke brown with a little bit of ultramarine to cool it down, making sure that stays mixed in the palette. Keep the brush fairly full but not with a blob of colour on the end so that you lose control of it. And it needs some fairly sensitive drawing here to explore those contours across the slope that the castle is built on. Once again, the importance of studies here is that the risk you're taking in this one-hit drawing you should have practiced, and the more you do the better you get, so do as much as you can before you start painting. And there's one or two tracks, it looks like people have walked across it. Now that's enormously helpful with the perspective. You can't hide behind technique and clever tricks. You've got to be absolutely honest, do an honest drawing, which hopefully would lead to an honest painting. I'll stop and have a look at that and let it dry because I'm going to have to come across it later on. I think that's enough at the moment. Okay, it's dried now. I have another look at it, and we're going to go back into drawing this foreground. And you may remember when we looked at the reference, we've actually reversed the direction of light. And in video 1 we were talking about core skills, and this is really all about core skills and the most important, which is drawing. And we're going to work now on this foreground, and while it was drying I noticed how strong that was before it dried. So we're just going to put a second layer on there which will help bring out the hill in front of those trees, and I quite like the contrast that was here going across the path, so I'll just bring that in before I start on the gate. Now this has, in the original reference, foliage hanging over the gate and also behind it, and draw in some of the surface texture within the shadows. Drawing with the side of the brush, nice broken texture, I can fill it in if I want, and it'll allow me to look at the tone, once again squinting at the page to see what's going on. I've got to stop and have a look and think about the shadow now, and I'm conscious that there's going to be some darks and lights here, shadow underneath some of that grass and some of these weeds and some of this texture, and also it's going to come towards me and increase in tone on that path. I think I'll stop there and have a look and plan the washes next. Okay, that's dry now, and I'm going to attempt to put in the sky and some of the basic planned washes over the rest of the landscape. And I've mixed up a mid-tone, about 40%, not quite mid-tone, of the same colour, and I'm going to attempt to put in a wash across here, and when we're at this point I'll drop in some colour to make it dark. I'll let that dry and I'll come back and repaint that hill, and while that's drying I'll work on some of this middle distance and foreground. Now that's a nice dark contrast which I was hoping for. looking at my reference again, that isn't a mechanical shape, it's got several curves within it, so I'm careful to put that in. And I'm aware of this side of the hill will be in shadow, and I'll come back to that. And with the darker colour that I'd mixed up previously, I'm going to put in much more of the same pigment, and I want that to be very dramatic on the right hand side. It may look almost black when you view it, but it actually will have a transparency, so it'll have some life in it. And before I lose the colour on the left here, before it dries, I'm just damping off a sea sponge, a natural sponge, and I'm going to lift off some of this colour so that's not such a hard edge. And it's possible that some of that colour will go onto the white paper, which isn't a problem, because I think it would look very unnatural if it was totally white. And I'll carry on that lifting and turning the sponge. And I'm going to be careful here and take the colour off the sponge, because I'm going to blot across this so that I can get some light in here. And that, if the sponge is clean, it doesn't put colour down on the white. It's just a film of water. Okay, put the sponge down and go back to our big brush, and we're going to be looking at the first of the washes to look at the side of this hill. And going back to my study again, big brush so you're not tempted to fiddle. That's as good as any to stop at. Well, that's dried quite well. I'm quite pleased with that, and what I think we ought to do now is look at it first time through a mount so that we can see how close it is to being finished. And just pop a mount on that we had prepared. Now that's just lift it off for a moment. That's without and very jumbly and all sorts of things to look at. And that's with the mount. When it calms down, as we mentioned before, it takes away all the fuss and the confusion, and you can also adjust the composition. That's where we planned it. Now, I'm quite pleased with that. That's almost there, and I think the temptation will be to go on and add lots of superfluous detail. And if we added too much here, it would take the attention away from that. What I do need to work on is that field and that hill, and then perhaps come in and do a little bit of finessing on these trees, and a tiny bit of drawing to create some interest and a little bit of decoration in the foreground. So I'll take that off and do that. Now, this same colour that we've used throughout, slightly lighter mix, and I'm conscious that on these fields, the contours of those fields are in shadow, once again looking carefully at my rough, but there's a broken edge because some of the edges are made up of woodlands, and that shows the form, but once again taking care not to become too mechanical, and I'm going to let some of that colour collect. If I wasn't working flat, I would probably tilt the board to force that colour to drain down. Just do that, and you can see it draining down, but it'll be enough. I'll drop in some dark where that really is very contrasty and is possibly darker, or at least the same tone as the sky. And just lighten some of this where it comes around the corner. And what you can also do, you can put on a mask and blot up to it, to create form. And then you can come back in with a darker mix of the same colour, and you can reinforce some of the detail. And now I can do the counter change that we talked about earlier, light to dark, dark, dark against light, and work back into some of those shapes. And I'm conscious that I've got a chance here to really put in some strong deep shadow against those original washes. For all intents and purposes, that is finished as a study with a concept to change the reference, change the lighting, introduce more atmosphere, and much more concentrating on ideas and being original, I hope. Well, good luck with all that, and goodbye.
Now available on DVD. Try these techniques yourself at home whenever you wish. The extended version of today's workshop is now available to order on DVD from the Painting and Drawing channel. For further information and to order your copy, go to www.paintingdrawingchannel.com.